There's a moment in every institution where the mask slips, where you see exactly how power actually works, not how it's supposed to work. That moment happened at Climate Pledge Arena during a Seattle Storm game, and it reveals something deeply uncomfortable about who gets protected and who doesn't. Two teenage girls showed up to support their team. They held signs. They cheered. They did what millions of fans do at sporting events every single day. Then a woman approached them, verbally attacked them, made them cry, and walked away without consequence. Sounds like a security failure, right? Standard issue stuff that gets resolved quickly. Except this woman wasn't just any spectator. She was a co-owner of the team they were watching. And the second security realized who she was, everything changed. The hesitation in their voices, the shift in tone, the immediate understanding that the normal rules no longer applied. This is the story of what happened that night, why the WNBA's response was completely inadequate, and what it reveals about a league at a critical crossroads. Because this isn't just about one incident or one owner losing control. It's about a pattern of power protecting power while new fans, the fans the league desperately needs, get treated as invaders. Let's break down exactly what went down and why a 5-game suspension is actually an insult. Game night at Climate Pledge Arena started like any other. Fans filtered in, found their seats, settled in to watch professional basketball. Two teenage girls, Anali and her friend, sat in their section holding signs supporting Sophie Cunningham and the Indiana Fever. Not controversial, not inflammatory, just standard fan behavior you see at literally every sporting event in America. They were there to cheer for their team, enjoy the game, and have a normal experience. That's all they wanted. That's what any reasonable person would expect when you pay for tickets and show up to a professional event. Then it escalated. A woman, not security, not an usher, just another spectator, approached them. But this wasn't a casual fan interaction. She got directly in their faces, immediately started cursing at them, and then brought up religion completely unprovoked. She told them she hoped God could forgive them for what they'd done. Think about that. Two teenage girls supporting the opposing team, and this adult woman is invoking divine judgment on them. The girls started crying. Not because they were being overly sensitive, not because they couldn't handle some trash talk, but because an adult woman was aggressively attacking them on a personal level about their faith while they were just trying to watch basketball. This is the part that matters. These girls weren't being rowdy. They weren't crossing lines. They were sitting in their seats, holding signs, doing exactly what fans are supposed to do. But they were supporting the wrong team in the eyes of someone with power and status in that building. And that's where the story gets darker. Brandy Cruz from Undivided was there with these girls. She's a media personality, she understands how institutions work, and she's responsible for teenage athletes who came to watch a game and ended up traumatized. She did exactly what you're supposed to do in that situation. She found security. She reported the incident. She pointed out the specific woman who made 2 children cry and asked them to handle it. That should have been the end of it. Security ejects the woman, maybe bans her from future games, everyone moves on. Standard procedure, standard accountability, but that's not what happened. When Brandy pointed out the aggressor to security, she got a response that changed everything. The security guard looked at the woman and said, "Oh, that's a co-owner of the team. Her name is Celeste Katon." That identification, those words. That's the moment the entire interaction shifted. Not "we'll handle it." Not "that's unacceptable behavior and we're removing her from the arena." Just an identification, as if knowing who someone is automatically explains why normal rules don't apply to them. As if ownership status creates immunity from the fan code of conduct that literally every other person in that arena has to follow. Think about what that response actually implies. When security identifies someone as a co-owner instead of addressing their behavior, they're communicating something very specific. They're saying the rules are different for you. They're saying your money and your status matter more than what you just did to 2 children. They're saying we know who you are, and that knowledge changes how we're going to treat this situation. That hesitation, that shift in tone, it's the exact moment when the rules changed. And here's what makes it worse. Brandy had video evidence. She documented the entire interaction. She had the girls on camera talking about what happened. She had security on camera explaining that this was a co-owner. She had everything needed to prove that this wasn't some ambiguous situation or a he said she said dispute. This was clear documentation of an adult in a position of power verbally attacking teenagers and receiving special treatment because of her status. The WNBA has a fan code of conduct. It's public. It's explicit. It says any in-arena comments using profanity are violations. Comments that are offensive, abusive, disparaging, or demeaning are violations. Discriminatory comments based on religious beliefs are violations. Celeste Katon violated multiple sections of that code. She cursed at 2 teenagers. She made offensive, abusive comments. She discriminated based on religious beliefs. By every objective measure, she violated the rules that every other fan in that building is subject to. But instead of being ejected, instead of facing immediate consequences, Celeste Katon walked back to her courtside seat next to Sue Bird and watched the rest of the game. She sat there in a premium location, enjoying the game, while 2 teenage girls were crying because of her actions. And the only reason any of this became public, the only reason anyone even found out what happened, is because Brandy Cruz has a media platform and knew how to use it. She put the story out there with receipts, with video evidence, with specific details about what happened and how security responded. She forced the WNBA's hand. Without her platform, without her willingness to expose this, Celeste Katon would have faced 0 consequences. It would have been buried. The girls would have gone home traumatized with no justice, and life would have moved on. That's the system we're dealing with. Security's response to Brandy Cruz deserves its own examination, because it perfectly illustrates how institutional power actually works in practice. When Brandy first reported the incident, she was told something that should have immediately triggered a response. She was told, "If you find her, let us know." That's an interesting instruction. It puts the burden on the fan to identify the aggressor rather than security doing their job of monitoring the arena and maintaining fan safety. But she took them at their word. She watched the woman. She waited. And when she had her opportunity, she found security again and pointed out exactly where Celeste Katon was sitting. She said, "You know that woman sitting next to Sue Bird? The one who made the girls cry? That's her." And the security guard asked, "Which one?" as if there might be some confusion about who she was talking about. Brandy described her, and the moment the security guard understood which woman she meant, his entire demeanor changed. "Oh, that's a co-owner of the team." Those words, the realization, the knowledge of who they were dealing with, you can almost hear it in the transcript. The tone shifts. The understanding that this is now a different kind of problem entirely. Because Celeste Katon isn't just any woman who got out of line at a game. She's not some rowdy spectator who had too much to drink and started causing problems. She's a co-owner of the Seattle Storm. She has power. She has status. She has money. She writes checks to the organization. And the second security understood that, they understood that the normal playbook didn't apply anymore. They couldn't just eject her. They couldn't just ban her from future games. Because you don't eject owners, you don't ban them, you protect them. What's remarkable is that Brandy actually challenged this in the moment. She said, "I don't care if you're the co-owner, Sue Bird, or who it is. This is unacceptable behavior." She was trying to make security understand that the rules are supposed to be universal. That ownership status doesn't change what actually happened. That 2 teenage girls still got verbally attacked regardless of who did the attacking. She was trying to appeal to basic logic and basic fairness. But security had already made their decision. They couldn't handle a co-owner the way they'd handle any other fan. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Instead of taking action, instead of addressing the violation that had just been documented in front of them, security offered a solution that basically passes the buck. They told Brandy to write a letter to the team. Let that sink in for a moment. Write a letter to the team about the team's co-owner. Who exactly is that letter going to? Who's going to enforce consequences when the person who violated the code of conduct is literally one of the people running the organization? It's an impossible situation by design. They're asking the victim to report the violation to the very people who benefit from protecting the violator. This is where the power dynamic becomes impossible to ignore. If any regular fan, any single person in that arena without money, without status, without ownership stakes, had gotten up from their seat, walked across the arena, and verbally abused two teenage girls until they cried, security would have ejected them immediately. There would be no hesitation, no discussion. No, let me think about this. They would have been escorted out of the building, possibly banned from future games, possibly even dealt with law enforcement depending on what they said. That's the standard. That's what happens when someone crosses the line at a professional sporting event. But Celeste Katon didn't get ejected. She walked back to her courtside seat. She watched the rest of the game. She had the privilege of her position, the protection of her money, and the complicity of an institution that understood that protecting her was easier than holding her accountable. And that's the real story here. Not one person's bad behavior, but an entire system designed to excuse that behavior if the person has enough power. The only reason any of this became public is because Brandy Cruz refused to accept that response. She understood that writing a letter would go nowhere. She understood that the system was designed to protect Celeste Katon, not to hold her accountable. So she did what journalists do. She documented it. She put it on her platform. She provided video evidence, specific details, and a timeline that proved exactly what happened and how it was handled. She forced the story into the public eye where people could see it. She made it impossible for the WNBA and the Storm organization to ignore. And even then, even with video evidence, even with a credible media personality calling it out, even with the story going viral, the response from the league was still inadequate. That's what we're going to explore next. The WNBA's fan code of conduct is publicly available. It's not some secret document that only insiders know about. It's posted where fans can see it. It's designed to create a standard that applies equally to everyone who enters an arena. The code is crystal clear. Any in-arena comments using profanity are violations. Comments that are offensive, abusive, disparaging, or demeaning are violations. Discriminatory comments based on protected characteristics, including religious beliefs, are violations. There's no asterisk. There's no fine print that says, unless you own part of the team. There's no clause that says, this applies to everyone except people with money and status. By every objective standard, Celeste Katon violated multiple sections of that code. She used profanity toward two teenagers. She made comments that were abusive and demeaning. She made discriminatory comments based on religious beliefs. If you walked into a WNBA arena and did what she did, you would be removed. Period. No discussion. No consideration of your feelings or intentions. You violated the rules. You get ejected. That's the deal everyone agrees to when they buy a ticket. Behave according to the code of conduct or face removal. But here's the thing about rules in institutional settings. They only work if they're applied consistently. The moment you start making exceptions for powerful people, you've fundamentally broken the system. You've communicated that the rules are negotiable. You've signaled that wealth and status create immunity. You've told every other person in that arena that these guidelines don't actually matter if you have enough power to ignore them. Compare Celeste Katon's experience to what any other fan would have faced in her exact situation. Let's say you're someone without money or status. You're sitting in a regular seat. You get up, you walk over to two teenage girls, you start cursing at them, you bring up their religion unprovoked and tell them God won't forgive them, you make them cry. What happens? Security is called immediately. They approach you. They explain that your behavior violates the fan code of conduct. They ask you to leave. You refuse or comply. If you refuse, they escalate. They physically remove you from the arena. You get banned from future games. Depending on what was said and how aggressive you were, police might get involved. That's standard protocol. That's what happens to regular fans who cross the line. Celeste Katon did all of those things. She violated the code, she made teenagers cry, and her consequence, she got to finish watching the game. She got to sit in her premium courtside seat. She experienced zero immediate consequences. In fact, she experienced protection. Security didn't remove her. The Storm organization didn't ban her. She was allowed to complete her evening as if nothing had happened. This is the double standard that Brandy Cruz exposed. And it's not just about this one incident. It's about what that inconsistency teaches everyone in that building. It teaches regular fans that the rules apply to them, but not to ownership. It teaches security that they need to treat owners differently. It teaches young people watching this unfold that money and status matter more than behavior and consequences. It teaches other owners that they can act however they want because the organization will protect them. Here's what makes it even more infuriating. The WNBA has been marketing itself as a family-friendly league. They've been trying to build inclusive environments where fans feel welcome and safe. They've positioned themselves as the alternative to other sports leagues that can be hostile or unwelcoming. That's their brand. That's what they're selling. And then you have a co-owner of one of their teams making teenage girls cry because they're supporting the opposing team. And the response is to protect the co-owner instead of the fans. The rules exist for a reason. They exist to protect everyone in the arena. They exist to create a baseline standard of behavior that everyone is supposed to follow. When you violate those rules, there are supposed to be consequences. Not because you're being punished unfairly, but because accountability is how institutions maintain order and safety. When you make exceptions for powerful people, you're essentially saying those rules don't really matter. You're saying they're suggestions, not actual requirements. And that has real consequences. Because if Celeste Katon can violate the code of conduct and face no immediate punishment, why can't other owners do the same thing? Why can't wealthy fans do the same? Why should regular fans follow rules that aren't enforced against people with power? The system becomes meaningless. The code of conduct becomes performance art. It's something the league puts out there to look good, but it doesn't actually govern behavior. Brandy Cruz made a crucial point in her video. She said that if she had gotten up, walked over to people, and cursed them out, she would have been ejected immediately and would have deserved it. She understood the rules. She understood they were supposed to apply to everyone. She understood that that's what makes a code of conduct actually functional. But she also understood that those rules weren't being applied equally. That understanding is the foundation of the entire controversy. Because it reveals that the WNBA's commitment to their own rules is conditional. It depends on who's violating them. What makes this incident truly disturbing is that the verbal assault on those two teenagers wasn't an isolated event that night. It was part of a larger pattern of hostility toward opposing fans, and that pattern tells a much darker story about what was happening inside that arena. Brandy Cruz documented multiple incidents during that single game. After Celeste Katon's initial confrontation, while one of the teenage athletes, Caitlyn Clark, got up to check on Anali, who was still crying, two other Storm fans tried to trip her as she walked by. Then they laughed about it. They thought it was funny. They thought it was entertaining to try to injure someone, to make them fall, to humiliate them publicly. These weren't accidents. These weren't misunderstandings. These were deliberate attempts to hurt someone, and the perpetrators thought the response was appropriate. They were willing to laugh about it, which means they were comfortable with what they'd just tried to do. That comfort level tells you something about the environment that had been created in that building. It tells you that hostility toward opposing fans had become normalized. It tells you that there was an implicit understanding that certain fans, in this case, Fever fans supporting Caitlyn Clark, weren't welcome and weren't safe. And then there was the spitting incident. A Caitlyn Clark fan was spat upon by a Storm fan. Stop and think about that. This isn't trash talk. This isn't heated words during a competitive game. This is someone physically assaulting another person. Spitting on someone is battery. It's a crime. It's one of the most degrading, dehumanizing things you can do to another person. It's a violation that goes beyond words or aggressive behavior. It's physical contact that's meant to humiliate and demean. Where was the Storm organization's statement about that? Where was the WNBA's outrage? Where was the investigation into who did it and what consequences they'd face? The spitting incident barely got mentioned in the broader conversation about what happened that night. The focus was on Celeste Katon's suspension, which actually makes sense given that she's an owner and there's video evidence. But the fact that an assault happened in the same building, to fans of the same team, and got minimal attention. That's revealing. This wasn't one bad apple having a bad night. This was a pattern of behavior. This was systematic hostility toward a specific group of fans. This was the creation of an environment where targeting opposing fans, particularly Fever fans, became acceptable. And here's the crucial part. That environment didn't just happen by accident. It was enabled. It was implicitly approved by the people running the building. When a co-owner of the team is the one initiating the hostility, when she's the one getting in teenagers' faces, when she's the one making them cry, what message does that send? It sends a clear message that this behavior is acceptable at the highest levels of the organization. Think about security's role in all of this. When they found out Celeste Katon was the one who made the girls cry, did they tell her to stop? Did they warn her? Did they tell her that her behavior was unacceptable? There's no indication of that. Instead, they seemed to accept it as just something that happened. They treated it as a complication rather than a violation of the rules they're supposed to enforce. That acceptance is permission. That passivity is endorsement. When the people running security at an arena don't take action against hostile behavior initiated by ownership, what do regular fans learn? They learn that behavior like that is tolerated. They might even learn that it's encouraged. They certainly learn that there won't be consequences, so other fans feel emboldened to act similarly. They see that the co-owner got away with verbal assault, so why shouldn't they try to trip teenage athletes or spit on opposing fans? The institutional permission has been granted. The targeting of Fever fans specifically is important context here. Caitlyn Clark is bringing new attention to the WNBA. She's attracting fans who wouldn't normally care about women's basketball. Some of those fans are teenagers. Some of them are casual observers who are just discovering the league. These are the exact fans the WNBA needs to retain to secure long-term growth. But instead of welcoming them, instead of creating safe spaces for them to enjoy the game, some legacy fans and ownership are treating them as invaders. There's a tension in the WNBA right now between longtime fans who have been supporting the league for years and this new wave of casual fans coming in because of Clark. Some of the established fans resent the attention she's getting. They resent that their favorite players aren't getting the same coverage. They resent that the media narrative has shifted. And in some cases, that resentment is manifesting as actual hostility. They're making the new fans feel unwelcome. They're creating hostile environments. They're trying to discourage people from coming to games. But here's what those fans need to understand, and what the WNBA needs to communicate clearly. The league needs this growth. The WNBA has been struggling financially for most of its existence. Teams need attendance. They need viewership. They need ticket sales. They need merchandise revenue. Caitlyn Clark is providing all of that. She's bringing new audiences, new money, new opportunities. Without her and the fans she's bringing, the league's financial future is uncertain. So hostility toward those new fans isn't just rude, it's economically self-sabotaging. It's actively working against the league's survival and growth. The WNBA's official response came down to a 5-game suspension for Celeste Katon. She's banned from attending the Seattle Storm's next 5 home games. And on the surface, if you don't think too hard about it, that might sound like a reasonable consequence. It's a punishment. It's a visible action. It's something. But when you actually break down what that suspension means in practice, you realize it's essentially meaningless. It's performative accountability designed to make it look like the league is taking action while actually protecting ownership from any real consequences. Let's start with the basic reality of ownership in professional sports. Owners don't attend every game. They pick and choose based on their schedule, based on how interesting the matchup is, based on whether they have other commitments. Some owners are at games constantly. Others show up sporadically. A 5-game suspension for an owner who probably wouldn't have attended all 5 of those games anyway is barely an inconvenience. It's possible Celeste Katon was planning to miss some of those games for legitimate reasons. She might have had prior commitments. The 5 games might include matchups she wasn't interested in. A 5-game suspension could actually cost her nothing in terms of entertainment or enjoyment. Compare that to suspending a regular season ticket holder or even a player. If you suspend a player, they can't perform. They can't make money. They can't work. They can't contribute to their team. There's real impact. If you suspend a regular fan, they miss games they paid for and want to attend. There's real consequence. But suspending an owner? She just stays home and misses games she might not have cared about anyway. The financial impact on her is zero. The impact on her life is minimal. And here's the thing about powerful people. They're used to consequences that don't actually affect them. They're used to fines that don't matter because they're wealthy. They're used to suspensions that are inconvenient but not devastating. They're used to public statements that blow over in a few days. Celeste Katon can wait out 5 games. She can let the news cycle move on. She can trust that by the time she's allowed back in the arena, people will have moved on to the next scandal. And then she goes right back to her courtside seats with 0 actual consequences. But there's something even more important than the inadequacy of the suspension itself. There's no public apology required. That's the real failure here. There's no press conference. There's no statement directly from Celeste Katon to the girls she made cry. There's no acknowledgement of what she did or why it was wrong. The WNBA issued a statement on her behalf. The organization spoke for her. She got to hide behind corporate language while the girls she attacked remain public figures in this story. Think about what that communicates. When a powerful person wrongs someone, real accountability includes facing that person and apologizing. It includes looking them in the eye and acknowledging the harm you caused. It includes humility and genuine contrition. But Celeste Katon never had to do that. She never had to speak publicly about this. She never had to explain herself or apologize directly. The WNBA protected her from that level of exposure. They issued a statement, took the PR hit themselves, and allowed her to disappear from the narrative. If any regular fan had made 2 teenage girls cry at a game, we'd demand an apology. We'd want to see them take responsibility. We'd want to see them understand the impact of what they did. But when it's a co-owner, the response is to let her hide while the organization handles the messaging. That's not accountability. That's damage control. And it sends a clear message to powerful people everywhere. If you have enough status, if you have enough money, you never have to directly face the consequences of your actions. The financial penalty aspect is equally revealing. There's no indication that Celeste Katon faced any meaningful financial consequence. Maybe there's a fine we don't know about, but it wasn't announced. And here's the reality. Any fine the WNBA levies against someone wealthy enough to own a basketball team is going to be relatively insignificant. If you fine her $50,000, that's real money to most people. But for someone wealthy enough to be a team owner, it's a rounding error. It's something you notice for a moment and then move on from. It's not a punishment, it's an inconvenience. Compare that to how the league treats regular fans. If you get violent at a game, you get banned. You lose money because you can't attend games you paid for. You face legal consequences. You might lose your job if your employer finds out. The impact is real and lasting. But when ownership violates the rules, the response is, we'll issue a statement, implement a light suspension, maybe collect a fine that doesn't hurt, and then we move on. The WNBA has been claiming that this situation forced them to take action. They point to the 5-game suspension as evidence that they're serious about accountability. But serious accountability would look different. It would be season-long suspension. Not 5 games, the entire rest of the season. It would be a requirement that Celeste Katon appear on camera and apologize directly to the girls, to their families, and to the fans who witnessed her behavior. It would include a substantial financial penalty, not thousands, but tens of thousands, donated directly to youth sports organizations or anti-bullying initiatives. And it would include a clear statement from the organization that ownership doesn't create immunity from the rules. None of that happened. Instead, we got the minimum response that allows the league to claim they took action while actually protecting ownership from meaningful consequences. And that's the precedent this sets. It tells other owners that if they violate the code of conduct, they'll get a light suspension and some bad press. That's the cost of doing business. That's acceptable. And that's a dangerous message to send. To understand why this incident matters so much, you have to understand the context of what's happening in the WNBA right now. Caitlyn Clark's rookie season has fundamentally changed the economics and the culture of professional women's basketball. She's brought unprecedented attention, attendance, and viewership to the league. Arenas are sold out. Television ratings are breaking records. Merchandise is flying off shelves. Sponsors who previously ignored women's basketball are suddenly interested in partnerships. For the first time in its history, the WNBA is getting mainstream attention that isn't framed as a novelty or a feel-good story. It's being treated as legitimate professional sports. That growth is incredible. It's what the league has been building toward for 27 years, but it's also creating tension within the WNBA community. Some longtime fans and players feel like the narrative has shifted too much toward Clark. They feel like their favorite players, who have been grinding in the league for years, aren't getting the same recognition. They feel like casual fans who come to see Clark don't actually care about women's basketball. They're just bandwagoners. And that resentment, that sense of being displaced or devalued, is manifesting as hostility toward the new fans Clark is bringing in. You see it in social media comments. You see it in fan interactions at games. You see it in some players' responses to the increased coverage around Clark. There's a competitive dynamic that's emerged between legacy WNBA fans and this new wave of casual observers. And instead of the league embracing the growth and trying to integrate new fans into the community, instead of welcoming them and helping them understand the league's history, some elements within the WNBA are actively discouraging them. That's the environment Celeste Katon's behavior exists within. When she got in those teenagers' faces and made them cry because they were supporting the Fever, she wasn't just having a bad moment. She was expressing the larger resentment that exists among some longtime fans. These teenage girls showed up to watch their team play. They weren't misbehaving. They weren't disrespecting anyone. They were doing exactly what fans are supposed to do. But to Celeste Katon, the fact that they were supporting the Fever was enough to warrant confrontation. What about their signs was so offensive that an adult woman and co-owner of the opposing team needed to get in their faces? What about supporting Sophie Cunningham was so threatening that it required a religious guilt trip? The answer is that it wasn't about what they did. It was about what they represented. They represented the new fans coming into the league because of Caitlyn Clark. They represented the shift in attention away from some of the established players. They represented change, and some people in the WNBA community aren't comfortable with that change. But here's what those legacy fans need to understand, and what's crucial for the league to communicate. The WNBA needs this growth. The league has operated at a loss for most of its existence. Teams have struggled financially. Players have had to work second jobs to support themselves. The infrastructure has been underfunded compared to other professional sports leagues. That's not a secret. That's been the reality of women's basketball for decades. Caitlyn Clark is changing that reality. She's bringing new revenue streams. She's creating new opportunities for players, for teams, for the entire ecosystem of women's professional basketball. The new fans she's attracting aren't taking anything away from established players. They're adding to the pie. They're making it bigger. They're bringing money into the system that benefits everyone, including the veterans who have been in the league for years. Their salaries are higher because of the revenue growth Clark is bringing. Their endorsement opportunities are better because of the increased mainstream attention. The league is healthier because of the new fans. When longtime fans respond to that growth by making new fans feel unwelcome, when they try to trip teenage athletes, when they spit on opposing fans, when ownership verbally attacks teenagers wearing the wrong team colors, they're actually working against their own interests. They're discouraging the exact people the league needs to survive and thrive. They're creating a hostile environment that new fans will remember. They're building a reputation that will discourage other casual fans from coming back. And that has real consequences for the league's long-term viability. Because here's the critical window the WNBA is in right now. The league has unprecedented attention. Casual fans are interested in women's basketball for the first time. Sponsors are interested. Media outlets are covering the league seriously. But that attention is fragile. If the experience these new fans have at games is hostile, if they feel unwelcome, if they witness poor behavior from ownership and fans, they're not going to become regular supporters. They're going to go back to not caring about women's basketball. They're going to find other sports to follow. And the WNBA will lose the growth it desperately needs. The irony is almost painful. The league has been building toward this moment for nearly 3 decades. They finally have the thing they've always needed, an influx of new fans with disposable income and genuine interest. And some elements within the community are actively working to alienate those fans. They're treating them as threats instead of opportunities. They're creating the exact hostile environment that will cause those fans to leave and never come back. Celeste Katon's behavior was a microcosm of this larger problem. She represented the resentment some longtime fans feel. She demonstrated the hostility that new fans are experiencing. And the weak response from the league communicated that the WNBA cares more about protecting wealthy owners than protecting the new audience that's essential to the league's future. That's a message that will have consequences far beyond this single incident. When the WNBA issued a 5-game suspension for Celeste Katon, they weren't just addressing a single incident. They were setting a precedent. They were communicating something to every other owner, every other wealthy fan, every security personnel, and every regular fan in the league about what the actual rules are and how they'll be enforced. And that precedent is dangerous because it's teaching the wrong lesson. The message the light punishment sends is this: if you're wealthy and powerful enough, you can violate the fan code of conduct and face minimal consequences. You'll get a short suspension, maybe some corporate statements, maybe a fine that doesn't actually hurt. Then you wait for the news cycle to move on, and you go right back to your courtside seats. The rules that apply to everyone else don't really apply to you. Your money creates immunity. That's the precedent. And think about who's watching. Other owners are watching. They're taking note of what happened to Celeste Katon and what she had to do to face even that minimal punishment. They're seeing that it took a media personality with a platform publicly exposing the situation with video evidence to get any response at all. They're understanding that if they're more careful, if they're not caught on video, if they do things in smaller ways that don't go viral, they can probably get away with behavior that violates the code of conduct. That's the lesson being taught. Other wealthy fans are watching too. People with money who have bought premium seats at games are noting that if they have enough status, if they're important enough, the rules might not apply to them in the same way. That changes how they feel entitled to behave. That encourages them to think they can cross lines that would get a regular fan ejected. And once a few wealthy people start pushing the boundaries, it normalizes hostile behavior in premium seating areas. It creates an expectation that this is how things work. Security personnel at the WNBA and other sports arenas are watching. They're learning that when powerful people violate the code of conduct, they should hesitate. They should call it upstairs. They should check who they're dealing with before taking action. They're learning that their job isn't consistently enforcing the rules. It's protecting the organization and the powerful people in it from consequences. That's a fundamentally different job, and it changes how they operate. And regular fans are watching too. They're the ones following the story, reading about the suspension, trying to understand what the league's actual values are. And what they're learning is that rules are conditional. They're learning that a regular fan would have been ejected for what Celeste Katon did. They're learning that wealth creates immunity. They're learning that if you have money, you can get away with behavior that would destroy anyone else. Some fans will internalize that lesson and think they're stupid for following rules that don't actually apply equally. Others will lose faith in the fairness of the system. But here's the deeper problem. This wasn't even the case that would have gotten reported without media intervention. Think about that. Brandy Cruz has a platform. She understands how media works. She has the credibility to speak publicly about what happened. But how many other incidents happen without documentation? How many times does a fan get harassed at an arena and there's no Brandy Cruz there to put it on social media? How many times does security tell someone to write a letter and that letter goes nowhere? This incident only became public because Brandy was there with video evidence and the platform to share it. But what about all the incidents that don't get documented? What about all the times security witnesses something they shouldn't and looks the other way? What about all the times regular fans get treated badly by people with power and nobody ever finds out? There's probably a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond what we know about. There's probably an institutional culture that tolerates or enables hostility that never gets captured on camera and never goes public. The WNBA can't afford to rely on social media outrage to drive accountability. That's not a system. That's hoping that somebody with a platform happens to be present when a violation occurs and decides to expose it. That's leaving the enforcement of your own rules up to chance. That's essentially abdicating responsibility for your own code of conduct. And think about the message it sends to the next owner or wealthy fan who feels like violating the code. They understand that they need to avoid viral moments. They understand that if they're careful, if they don't get caught on video, if it's just their word against the victim's word, they're probably fine. They can probably get away with it. The league only acts when there's public pressure. So don't create the kind of public pressure that brings attention to what you did. This is how institutions fail to enforce their own standards. This is how rules become meaningless. This is how wealthy people learn that they can operate under different standards than everyone else. It's not one dramatic moment where the institution declares that the rules don't apply to powerful people. It's a series of smaller moments where the powerful person faces minimal consequences and learns that they can get away with more next time. It's precedent being set through inadequate responses to violations. The WNBA had an opportunity to respond to Celeste Katon's behavior in a way that would have communicated that ownership doesn't create immunity, that the code of conduct is universal, that accountability matters. Instead, they issued a weak punishment that teaches the opposite lesson. They've told every other powerful person in the league, if you violate the rules, you'll face minimal consequences, and then everything goes back to normal. That's the precedent. That's the message. And it will have consequences far beyond this single incident. The 5-game suspension is what the WNBA did. But let's talk about what should have happened. Let's talk about the kind of response that would actually communicate that the league takes its values seriously and that ownership doesn't create immunity from the rules. Brandy Cruz laid it out clearly, and she was right about what real accountability looks like. Celeste Katon should be suspended from all Seattle Storm home games for the remainder of the season. Not 5 games, the rest of the season. This is the most straightforward response because it actually matches the punishment that would be applied to any other fan. If a regular spectator made 2 teenage girls cry by verbally attacking them, they would be banned from the building, possibly permanently. A season-long suspension from home games is a reasonable equivalent for an owner who violated the code of conduct. It says the rules apply to everyone, no exceptions, regardless of how much money you have or what position you hold. But the suspension isn't enough by itself. There needs to be a financial penalty, not a small fine that gets paid and forgotten. A substantial amount, tens of thousands of dollars, something that actually matters even to someone wealthy enough to own part of a WNBA team. And this isn't about extracting punishment for punishment's sake. It's about making the consequence meaningful enough that it actually changes behavior. When wealthy people face financial penalties, those penalties need to be large enough to register as significant. Otherwise, they're just the cost of doing business. And here's the crucial part. That money should go directly to organizations supporting youth sports and anti-bullying initiatives. Not to the league, not to the Storm, to external organizations that work on the exact issues that this incident highlights. It becomes restitution. It becomes a way to do positive work in the community that suffered from this behavior. It transforms the punishment from pure penalty into something that creates actual benefit. But financial penalties and suspensions are just structural accountability. They're the organizational response. The real accountability, the thing that actually matters, is a public apology. Celeste Katon needs to stand in front of a camera and speak directly to what she did. Not a press release issued on her behalf. Not a statement read by a PR representative. Her, on camera, explaining what happened and why it was wrong. She needs to apologize to Anali specifically. By name. Looking at the camera, understanding that she's speaking to the teenager she made cry. She needs to apologize to Anali's friend. She needs to acknowledge that they were doing nothing wrong, that supporting the opposing team is normal and acceptable fan behavior, and that she violated their safety and their trust. She needs to take responsibility for her actions without excuses or qualifications. Then she needs to apologize to Brandy Cruz. She needs to acknowledge that she put Brandy in an impossible position by forcing her to report her own team's co-owner. She needs to understand that Brandy was just trying to protect teenagers under her care and had to navigate a system that wanted to protect the perpetrator instead of the victims. She needs to take responsibility for making that situation necessary. And she needs to apologize to every parent who brings their child to a Storm game. She needs to acknowledge that her behavior created an unsafe environment. She needs to understand that parents trust that their kids can go to a professional sporting event and not be verbally attacked by adults in positions of power. She needs to commit to being part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. But the apology isn't just words. It needs to be paired with action from the Storm organization. The team needs to address the broader environment that enabled this behavior and allowed multiple hostile incidents to occur in the same night. They need to hold a press conference where ownership lays out specific new security measures. They need to announce concrete steps they're taking to prevent hostile fan behavior from targeting opposing fans. They need to make it clear that courtside seats don't give anyone immunity from the code of conduct. They need to reach out directly to Brandy Cruz and the girls who were harassed. Yes, maybe they've done that privately, but it needs to be public acknowledgement too. These girls came to watch basketball and left traumatized. That happened in the Storm's building. That's the Storm's responsibility. The organization needs to own it. They need to commit to making it right, to providing whatever support is needed, and to ensuring that this doesn't happen again. And the WNBA needs to revisit their ownership standards more broadly. If you're going to give someone an ownership stake in a professional team, there should be behavioral expectations that come with that. There should be a morals clause in ownership agreements. There should be clear consequences for creating PR disasters and hostile environments. Celeste Katon's behavior isn't just her personal failure, it reflects on the entire league. The WNBA's brand is damaged every time an owner acts like this and gets away with minimal consequences. The league is at a critical growth moment. Caitlyn Clark's rookie season has brought unprecedented attention. Attendance is up, viewership is up, merchandise sales are up, new sponsors are paying attention. This is a moment of genuine opportunity, but incidents like this threaten that growth. New fans who show up to a game and get harassed aren't coming back. Parents who bring their daughters to see professional women's basketball and watch those daughters get made to cry by an owner aren't coming back. Casual fans who see the story and think the league has a toxic fan culture aren't giving it a chance. Every incident like this costs the WNBA potential long-term fans and revenue. The league can't afford to be protective of owners who create these problems. They can't afford to issue weak punishments that don't actually change behavior. They can't afford to wait for social media outrage before taking action. They need to be proactive. They need to set clear standards. They need to enforce those standards consistently, regardless of who violates them. That's what real accountability looks like. This story isn't about one owner having a bad night or one incident at one basketball game. It's about a system that protects power and abandons principle. It's about an institution that claims to have values, but only enforces them selectively. It's about the difference between what a league says it believes and what it actually does when those beliefs are tested. Celeste Katon should be ashamed. She's a grown woman who made teenage girls cry at a basketball game. She used her position and her courtside seat to intimidate kids who were just supporting their team. And when security found out who she was, the protection apparatus kicked in immediately. That's not leadership. That's not being a champion for women's sports. That's being a bully who hides behind money and status. The 5-game suspension is insulting. It's the WNBA hoping this blows over quickly without actually addressing the underlying problems. It's performative accountability that doesn't cost Katon anything meaningful. She'll miss 5 games she probably wouldn't have attended anyway, wait for the news cycle to move on, and go right back to her courtside seats with 0 real consequences. The WNBA talks a big game about values and community and creating welcoming environments. Now's the time to back that up with action. The ball is in their court. The question for you, is 5 games enough? Should Celeste Katon be banned for the entire season? What does real accountability look like to you?